My uncle Gary, a man who lived for status he never truly earned, shoved my 10-year-old daughter, Sophie, off her chair at our family anniversary table in Savannah. That seat is for my real grandkid. Get out, he barked, his voice sharp with a cruelty he no longer bothered to hide. Sophie hit the hardwood floor in front of 14 relatives, and not a single person moved. I did not scream, and I did not cry. I simply stood up, looked Gary dead in the eyes, and said 4 words that ended his reign. This house is mine. My mother's wine glass shattered on the floor, and Gary went pale, because he knew his secret was officially dead. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from and what time it is for you right now. I would love to know who is part of our community and standing with Sophie today. I carried Sophie to the car, my heart a block of ice despite the lingering Savannah heat. I strapped her into the back seat and sat in the driver's seat, staring at the dash with a cold, hollow focus. I did not cry, I did not scream, and I did not ask why. I just pulled out my phone. 7 years of legal training had taught me that when a conflict hits its absolute peak, you do not lose your mind, you take control. I opened my banking app with a steady hand. For 8 years, I had been the silent investor in Gary's version of a family lifestyle. I had been sending him $2,200 every single month, without fail, a payment I once thought bought my daughter a place at their table. Gary didn't call it rent. He called it a mandatory contribution to the Whitmore Family Trust. He convinced me that these funds were legally required to cover Grandma June's specialized medical care and the mounting estate taxes to keep the mansion in the family. As a lawyer, I was blinded by my duty to my grandmother, never imagining my own uncle would fabricate a legal entity just to siphon my salary. Now, I realized it was nothing more than a subscription fee for a club that did not want us, and I was finally canceling the service. With a few clinical taps, I terminated the recurring electronic transfer. The next $2,200 would be staying exactly where it belonged, in my account. I did not stop there. I revoked his access to the secondary credit card I'd let him carry for what he called family emergencies. I canceled his membership at the Savannah Harborside Golf Club and terminated the premium streaming accounts I had been footing the bill for since the day I moved into that cottage. My anger was not loud this time. It was a clinical audit of a bankrupt relationship. I rubbed my eyes, trying to find a shred of guilt or regret, but there was only a sharp, needle-like clarity. This was not a family dispute anymore. It was an accounting session. Gary had treated my daughter like an obligation, while using my hard-earned salary to fund his superior ego. I looked at the mansion in the rearview mirror, its lights glowing with a prestige that was not actually backed by anything real. Gary believed his power came from his name and his seat at the head of that table. He did not realize that his authority was just a costume he had been renting from me 1 month at a time. As of 12:03 a.m., the payment was officially declined. I sat at the small wooden table in our cottage, the only light coming from the cold blue glow of my laptop screen. Sophie was finally asleep, her breathing deep and rhythmic, though her hands still twitched in her sleep, a lingering echo of the floor hitting her back. I opened my digital banking archive and started scrolling. I was not looking for memories. I was looking for entries. 96 transfers, 8 years of loyalty translated into raw data. Each one was for $2,200, totaling $211,200. I stared at that number until it felt like it was carved into my retinas. $211,200. That was not just rent. That was the cost of my silence. That was the price I'd paid to keep my Aunt Patricia and Uncle Gary from looking at my adopted daughter like she was a trespasser. Every time I hit send on those transfers, I thought I was buying us a safety net. I thought I was investing in a future where Sophie would be seen as a real member of this family. But looking back, the data told a different story. I remembered the summer I paid $15,000 to fix the roof of the main mansion because Gary claimed the family fund was temporarily illiquid. I remembered the property taxes I covered 3 years in a row, totaling $34,000, while Sophie sat at a card table in the corner, wearing hand-me-downs from Victoria's daughter, Olivia. I was the one footing the bill for the very stage they used to humiliate us. It was a classic case of what my therapist calls the survivor's invisible chain. I was not paying rent. I was paying a ransom. I had spent 8 years trying to buy a feeling of belonging for a child who was already mine. I had convinced myself that if I just provided enough value, if I just carried enough of their weight, they would finally see Sophie's worth. I was trapped in a prison without bars, using my own professional success to reinforce the walls that kept us on the outside. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for nearly a decade. I looked at the photos of Sophie in those oversized, faded shirts Victoria had graciously donated to us, while her own daughter, Olivia, paraded around in designer silk, paid for with the money I had saved Gary on his mortgage. Every cent of those $211,200 had been a brick in the altar of Gary's ego. There was no sadness left now, no panic. There was only the cold, hard math of a bad investment. I had been the primary shareholder in their version of a family, and tonight I was filing for a total liquidation. It was not a breakdown, it was a balance sheet. And for the first time in 8 years, the Thornton family was deep in the red. Gary's escalation started exactly at 9:14 a.m. the following Monday. I did not have to check the time. My phone simply began to scream. It was the frantic, staccato vibration of a man who had just tried to buy his status and found out his credit was no longer good. Gary had likely walked into the club for his usual morning round and had his membership card handed back to him with a polite, devastating decline. The first message was a mass text sent to all 14 relatives who had witnessed the scene in the garden. It was a masterpiece of gaslighting. Gary claimed that I was having a mental breakdown and that I was a rebellious adopted child who was abusing the elderly by withholding the financial support they were owed for the years of tolerance they had shown us. He painted himself as the victim of a cold-hearted lawyer who had forgotten her place and her debts. Minutes later, Victoria's assault began on social media. She posted a photo of her daughter, Olivia, looking sad and lonely, with a caption about how family should support family and how some people were too obsessed with money to care about real blood. She did not name me, but the subtext was loud and clear to everyone in our circle. My inbox was being flooded with notifications from distant cousins and family friends calling me vindictive and cruel. Then came the phone call. I answered because I wanted the recording for my files. Gary's voice was not the booming, authoritative tone I had grown up fearing. It was high-pitched, thin, and desperate, the sound of a parasite that had just realized its host was developing a lethal immune system. He told me that my petty behavior had cost him his social standing at the club. He claimed I had humiliated him in front of his peers. Then he delivered the ultimatum. He told me that if $10,000 were not transferred into his account by the following morning as honor compensation for the damage I had done to his reputation, he would have the sheriff at my door. He told me I had exactly 24 hours to vacate the cottage. He called it a necessary cleansing of his property. He barked that he was done showing me mercy and that I would learn what it felt like to be truly alone. I listened to him scream until he ran out of breath. I did not interrupt his rant. I did not defend my choices. I just leaned back in my chair and watched the light reflect off the Savannah Harbor through the window. I felt a strange sense of gratitude for his rage. It was the ultimate green light. By demanding $10,000 for his ego and threatening to throw a 10-year-old child out on the street, Gary was handing me the very shovel he would use to bury himself. He thought he was being an alpha. He thought he was exerting control through intimidation. He did not realize that in my world, he was just making a very loud, very public confession of intent to extort. I ended the call without saying a single word. I did not need to speak. I needed to document. I went back to my laptop and opened a new file. Gary wanted 24 hours? Fine. I would use every single second of them to ensure he never had a comfortable minute in that mansion ever again. I did not panic when Gary threatened me with the sheriff. In my world, a threat is just a poorly constructed argument. I am a lawyer. I spent my life learning how to dismantle lies one paragraph at a time. I started my legal triage. When a case is hemorrhaging, you do not stop to cry. You find the source of the bleed and you clamp it. I spent the next 4 hours at the Chatham County Courthouse digging through land records that Gary assumed I would never have the time or the reason to check. Gary always told the family that Aunt Patricia had inherited the estate. He acted like the landlord because he believed he owned the ground beneath my feet, but the digital records told a different story. The deed for 14 Burwood Lane was still recorded in the name of June A. Whitmore, my grandmother. There was no transfer, no quitclaim deed, no life estate, nothing. Then I found the document Gary had been using to play God, a registered power of attorney filed 2 years ago. I examined the scanned image on the terminal, zooming in until the pixels blurred. The signature for June Whitmore was stiff. It was too precise. It looked like someone had traced it with a trembling hand, missing the natural fluid motion of her real handwriting. I checked the notary stamp. It was from a small office Gary used for his personal investment firm. I did not call Gary. I called Grandma June's personal cell phone, a number Gary had told the family was disconnected months ago because of her declining health. It rang 3 times before a familiar, sharp voice answered. "Emily, is that you?" Grandma sounded thin, but her mind was as clear as a Savannah winter morning. I asked her why she had not been at the anniversary dinner. "Gary told me you were on a research trip in the Florida Keys," she said. Her voice caught for a moment. "He told me the house was undergoing fumigation and that I had to stay in the assisted living wing of the clinic for my own safety. He was isolating her. He was using a forged document to collect $2,200 a month from me while keeping the true owner of the house locked away in a gilded cage. He was not just a bully. He was an occupant, essentially a tenant without a lease, running a massive fraud. He had no legal right to collect a single cent of those $211,200 I had paid him over the last 8 years. I felt a cold surge of professional adrenaline. Gary thought he was the one serving an eviction notice. He had no idea that I had just pulled the county records and discovered he was a squatter in his own mother's house. I told Grandma June I was coming to see her immediately. I told her to wait for me and not to sign a single piece of paper. Gary had 47 seconds of rage recorded on my phone, but I had the entire weight of the Georgia legal code in my head. He wanted a war? Fine. I was bringing a legal strike so precise he would not see it coming until the handcuffs clicked. I did not just walk into Grandma June's room. I marched in with the weight of an entire legal library behind my eyes. Grandma June was sitting by the window, her back as straight as a Georgia pine. The moment she saw me, her eyes sharpened. She did not need a hug. She needed a report. I sat down and placed my laptop on her small table, the fan whirring like a heartbeat. "Gary told us you were fading, Grandma," I said, my voice as clinical as an autopsy report. "He told us your mind was a maze. But I have spent the morning in the county records, and it is not your mind that is lost, it is his conscience." I opened the file on the education fund. Grandma June reached under her bed and pulled out a battered metal box. "Gary thinks he is a wolf because he has been surrounded by sheep for too long," she whispered, handing me a stack of original bank ledgers he thought he had shredded. He forgot that I taught him how to count. He just never realized I was counting the things he was taking, too. I began my audit of his criminal enterprise. The $240,000 education trust Grandma had established for all the great-grandchildren was supposed to be a sanctuary for our future. Instead, it had been Gary's personal petty cash drawer. I tracked the withdrawals with the precision of a bloodhound on a fresh trail. There it was, $37,320, vanished over the last 18 months. I watched the digital entries flicker on the screen, each one a theft from a child. I saw a payment of $8,000 for a summer enrichment program that coincided exactly with the week Victoria took Olivia on a private tour of the Amalfi Coast. I saw another withdrawal for $5,000 labeled educational supplies that matched the exact date Gary had been photographed at a high-stakes poker tournament in Atlantic City. He was not just a bully. He was a common thief who had been looting his own mother's legacy to fund a lifestyle he could not afford. My anger was not loud this time. It was a cold calculation of a debt that could never be repaid with an apology. I felt the survivor's invisible chain finally snap. For 8 years, I had been paying Gary $2,200 a month in rent for a cottage he did not own. And all that time, he had been double-dipping, stealing Sophie's future while I was footing the bill for his present. I dug deeper into the property records Grandma had saved. "He mortgaged the North Marsh acreage, did he not?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Grandma June nodded slowly, her fingers trembling as she pointed to a signature on a deed of trust. I leaned in, my lawyer's eyes analyzing the loops of the letters. It was a masterpiece of forgery, bold, confident, and utterly fraudulent. Gary had used the fake power of attorney to borrow $400,000 against the family land to cover his gambling losses. He had avoided the strict audits of major banks, instead taking the forged power of attorney to a shady private equity firm known for high-interest, asset-based loans. With the help of a compromised notary from his investment circle, he bypassed the standard identity verification for Grandma June, effectively gambling with a roof that wasn't his to bet. This was not a family drama anymore. This was a criminal case with a paper trail a mile long. Gary had treated our history like a resource he could strip mine, and he had left a trail of forged signatures and embezzled trust funds in his wake. He was not shocking us with his cruelty, he was shocking us with his criminality. He had removed every remaining path to redemption. He was not a patriarch, he was a felon waiting for a court date. I closed the laptop with a sharp click. The silence in the room was absolute vacuum sealed by the gravity of what we had found. Gary thought he was the master of this house, but he had spent years building a prison out of lies, and I was about to hand him the keys to his new cell. I have enough to put him away, Grandma, I said, my voice lethal and factual. Grandma June reached out and gripped my hand, her skin paper thin, but her hold surprisingly strong. Don't just put him away, Emily, she said. Take back the table he thought he could kick you off of. Show him that blood does not make a family, integrity does. I chose the tea garden for our final meeting, the same spot where, only days earlier, the sound of my daughter hitting the floor had been met with the silence that redefined my entire world. Gary was already there, sitting at the head of the wrought iron table, nursing a glass of bourbon as if he still possessed the dignity to toast to his own reflection. Victoria and Aunt Patricia flanked him, their expressions a mixture of practiced pity and sharp, predatory anticipation. Gary did not even wait for me to sit. I told you 24 hours. Emily, he said, his voice returning to that gravelly, condescending bass. I see you brought your laptop. I hope you are here to show me the confirmation of that $10,000. Otherwise, the locksmith is already on his way to the cottage. You have had 8 years of our charity, and this is how you repay us? You are an ungrateful, opportunistic brat. And honestly, the only thing I regret is not throwing you and that girl out years ago. I stood there, Sophie's small, steady hand gripped in mine, and watched him. I looked at Gary and realized I was witnessing a psychological phenomenon, the illusion of power from an empty wallet. Gary's authority had never been an internal trait. It was a costume he had rented using Grandma June's credit and my monthly rent payments. He was a man who believed his seat at the head of the table gave him the right to dictate reality, but his position was as hollow as the accounts he had looted. Without the stolen capital to back up his ego, he was nothing more than a loud man in a cheap suit shouting at a storm he could not control. I did not answer his insults. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick manila folder, placing it on the table between us. I did not slide it toward him. I dropped it. The sound of 300 pages of evidence hitting the glass was louder than his shouting. Actually, Uncle Gary, you are right about one thing, I said, my voice dropping to a calm, professional register that made Patricia shift uncomfortably. Ownership is everything. I opened the folder to the first page, the certified deed from the Chatham County Clerk's office. I watched his eyes scan the name at the top, June A. Whitmore. I watched the blood drain from his face as he realized the foundation of his entire life had just turned to liquid. This mansion belongs to Grandma June. It has always belonged to her. And since you have been using a forged power of attorney to collect rent from me for 8 years, you have not been a landlord. You have been a squatter. The garden went vacuum sealed. The only sound was the distant calling of a hawk and the frantic, shallow breathing of a man whose identity was evaporating in real time. I flipped the page to the bank ledgers, highlighting the $37,320 he had embezzled from the education trust. I showed him the forged signatures on the North Marsh land mortgage, the $400,000 gamble he had taken with a legacy that was not his to touch. His power was gone. The alpha was dead. I saw the exact moment his reality shattered. He began to tremble, small, fast tremors that shook the ice in his bourbon. He tried to summon his old rage, but without the illusion of ownership, his voice was nothing but a pathetic whine. Emily, please, we can work this out. It is a family matter. We are blood. I leaned in, my face inches from his. I remembered the way he had looked at Sophie when she hit the floor. No, Gary, I said, and the satisfaction was colder and deeper than any revenge I had ever imagined. This is not a family matter. This is an audit. And you are right about one more thing. This seat is not for strangers. I pulled the final document from the folder, the formal eviction notice signed by Grandma June and authorized by the Chatham County Court. I placed it directly on top of his bourbon glass. "That is why you have to leave immediately," I said, my voice lethal and final. "You have 2 hours to pack your things. After that, building security will be here to escort you off the property." You thought you could kick my daughter off her chair, but you forgot that I am the one who has been paying for the floor you are standing on. You're not the master of this house, Gary. You are just a debt I am finally writing off. The eviction was not just a legal victory. It was a total systemic collapse for Gary and Patricia. Within 48 hours, the man who once directed family dinners like a king was packing his designer suits into cardboard boxes. They relocated to a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood Gary used to mock from his car window. Victoria had to sell her car just to cover the initial legal fees for the embezzlement investigation. The alpha of the family was now just another tenant writing a rent check he could barely afford. 2 weeks after the garden meeting, Sophie and I officially moved into the main mansion. Grandma June insisted. She told me that the house had been waiting for a real family for 15 years, and it was time the walls heard something other than lies. Sophie chose the sun-drenched room overlooking the tea garden for her studio. The first thing she hung on the wall was her painting, the one titled Our Family Christmas. She had added new figures to it: Grandma June, her therapist, my law partner, and me. Gary and Victoria were gone, replaced by people who actually showed up. Sophie finally understood that she did not have to earn belonging. She just belonged. I want to take a moment to speak directly to you, the person watching this, who has always felt like the one on the edge. Maybe you have spent years trying to buy a seat at a table where you were never truly welcome. Maybe you have been told you are too dramatic, too different, or just not enough. I am here to tell you that the survivor's invisible chain only has as much power as you give it. You do not need to beg for a chair at a table built on your own sacrifices. You are not a burden, and your worth is not a business transaction. Stop trying to fix people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Instead, take that energy and use it to build your own table. Surround yourself with people who celebrate your existence instead of just tolerating it. The best revenge is not a loud confrontation. It is a quiet, successful life lived entirely on your own terms. If this story helped you realize your own value today, please subscribe and share it with someone else who needs to hear it. Every child and every person deserves a seat at a table where their presence is a gift, not an obligation. Thank you for listening.